COVID-19 that crippled the world for 2 years since it was first reported at the end of 2019 is coming to the fore once again as new variants have been reported in several countries. The risk of spread is high for Nepal as well as infections in neighboring China and India is on the rise. In this scenario, all stakeholders are urged to increase precautionary measures before it goes out of hand once again. Good morning, I'm Sapsanamma. Let's begin with the top stories of the hour. Threats of coronavirus rising amid weak monitoring at border points as more Nepalese returning from India test positive. COVID-battered tourism sector takes momentum as domestic and international tourists flock to tourism capital Pokhara. Stakeholders gear up to lengthen visitors' stay. World Health Organization urges China to share real-time information on the COVID-19 situation in the country as it continues to assess the latest surge in infections. And Liverpool defeats Leicester 2-1. Brentford clinches an easy 2-0 win over West Ham United at the English Premier League. Nepalese returning home from India have been testing positive for COVID-19, raising the risk of community spread of the virus. However, monitoring at border points in Nepalganj has been feeble as even those who have tested positive are being sent home instead of quarantine or isolation centers. The Jammu transit in West Nepal has begun COVID tests after halting it for 3 months. Since mid-September, COVID tests at the transit had been stopped and people were allowed to move freely. Tests have resumed from Thursday as the number of infections in neighboring China and India surged. China has reported of a new variant, BF7, of the virus, which has yet to be detected in Nepal. However, the risk is high given the crowd of people at border points like Jammu. On Thursday, 1 among 55 of those who crossed the transit had tested positive for the COVID-19. Nepal's tourism sector that had been battered by COVID crisis has begun taking pace as Pokhara, also dubbed the tourism capital of the country, is witnessing flocks of domestic and international visitors. Tourism entrepreneurs are hopeful the sector will reach its previous high. Most tourism activities came to a standstill during the 2 years of COVID crisis, pushing many businesses in even the most happening cities like Pokhara to shut down. However, the recent surge in the number of visitors has revived the energy of tourism businesses. Hotels have reported of increasing occupancy and entrepreneurs have begun hosting festivals and international events to lengthen visitors' stay. Businesses are putting all efforts into establishing Pokhara as a travel destination for all seasons. It is estimated that around 40% of the total visitors of Nepal reach Pokhara, while 40% of the total visitors in the city are domestic tourists. Businesses hope that Pokhara International Airport, that is to come into operation from the New Year's, will help boost the number of visitors and Pokhara's tourism. The nation witnessed interesting turn of political events with the alliance between 7 parties pushing Nepali Congress to an opposition's role. CPN Maoist Center Chair Pushpa Kamal Dahal has assumed the post of executive head, while CPN UML Chair KP Sharma Oli leads a high-level political mechanism that has been designed to check on the premier. Given the history of the two leaders, many have anticipated similar power tussle this time as well. It may be recalled back in 2017, an imbalance in power equation between leader duo Oli and Dahal had resulted in the toppling of the government in 3.5 years. Oli and Dahal parted ways and were not even talking terms since the dramatic development. But last Sunday, that has brought the two leaders under one umbrella. The two parties, since the mega deal, have not been able to move ahead with the much-touted package agreement. There is a bitter past precedent where Maoist Center Chair Dahal had walked out of the government to support Nepali Congress, which eventually led to the fall of UML government. Dahal at the time had alleged UML chair of not living to his words, while some analysts also feel that the two leaders might not repeat similar errors of judgment this time. The government that has been formed with an alliance between 7 parties that ironically have differing political ideologies has begun legworks for the much-touted common minimum programs. A task force to finalize the programs has been formed, and the government intends to make an ideal program list that would help avoid conflict during its operation, which is highly likely due to differing interests among the alliance partners. All 7 partners of the coalition have differing political ideologies. Rashtriya Prajatantra Party has been advocating for a Hindu state and for the reinstatement of monarchy, while CPN Maoist Centre and UML's political ideology is based on communism and socialism. Another coalition partner, Janata Samajwadi, has continued to call the constitution incomplete, while Nagarik Unmukti has been demanding for the release of its jailed leaders, including Resham Chaudhary, who has been handed life in prison for the infamous Tikapur massacre. Rashtriya Swatantra Party, that has emerged as the 4th largest party from the November 20 election, has been announcing it will stand for issues concerning the general public, and the party has been raising its voice against the provincial setup, calling it unwarranted. Given the contrasting stance, critics have expressed skepticism over the parties finding a consensus on the common minimum program. The task force, meanwhile, has begun discussions on agendas that are attainable and has tried to avoid issues that conflict with the constitution. All 7 parties have similar agenda for development and national prosperity. However, the approaches as announced through the election manifestos are different. Analysts have opined all parties of the coalition, regardless of the scale of their presence at the parliament, will look to be acknowledged equally through the government agenda. However, they are also hopeful that the parties will find a consensus, saying that political parties had fostered the culture of partnership and alliances in recent time. The Home Ministry has mobilized security personnel for the former Prime Ministers, which is against a recent directive by the ministry itself. Immediately after Home Minister Rabi Lamichhane had assumed office, the ministry issued a circular to withdraw all the security personnel who have been mobilized against the security norms. The ruling, however, has not been implemented in the case of former Prime Ministers. The Home Ministry this Wednesday had directed the withdrawal of all security personnel mobilized against the existing norms and regulations within 48 hours. The directive at one place has not been implemented, neither has there been any solidarity in the implementation of the decision. Former Prime Ministers Sher Bahadur Deuwa, KP Sharma Oli, Madhav Kumar Nepal and Chalanath Khanal have been enjoying a battalion of security personnel. Up to 30 security personnel are deployed when these former Prime Ministers take out their convoy. Former Prime Minister Baburam Bhattarai has been managing with only 2 security personnel. As per the Home Ministry regulations, there is a provision for mobilizing 15 security personnel for former Prime Ministers. This security used by former Prime Minister Lokendra Bahadur Chand falls under the regulation. When asked about the lack of unanimity on the implementation of the ruling, spokesperson at the Home Ministry Phanindra Mani Pokhrel replied that the difference in number was mainly due to varied security challenges. Meanwhile, as per the Home Ministry directive, some 278 security personnel have been withdrawn in the past 48 hours. Armed Police Force has withdrawn 118 personnel, while the number is 100 for Nepal Police. Some 1,300 security personnel have been used for the VIPs. More than half the budget of the Ministry of Agriculture goes towards ensuring supply of chemical fertilizers every year. The ministry has said it has allocated some 38 billion rupees for this purpose this year. The government is now preparing to revise the grant provided in chemical fertilizers, saying that agricultural productivity had not changed despite the yearly increase in investments in fertilizers. Experts have meanwhile urged the government against reducing the grant amount. The government has been providing around 70 rupees grant per kilogram of urea fertilizer, which costs 85 rupees. Likewise, farmers can get 68 rupees per kilogram grant money for DAP fertilizer that costs 112 rupees per kilogram. In the meantime, cooperatives have been buying urea for 15 rupees per kilogram and DAP for 44 rupees per kilogram and selling it to farmers by adding supply costs. The Ministry of Agriculture had urged the government for a revision, saying that the support to farmers covering 70% of cost was not sustainable. Meanwhile, 38 billion rupees has been allocated for the grant this year, and the ministry has begun the process to contract company for fertilizers worth 31 billion rupees. The The government, through a global tender, procures around 300,000 tons of fertilizers from China, Morocco, Saudi Arabia and Oman, among other nations. The domestic demand, however, is of 700,000 tons. Given the deficit, instead of cutting down on the grant, experts have suggested the government categorize farmers instead and limit the subsidy to farmers from marginalized communities. Experts have also recommended the government construct chemical fertilizer factories to ease the supply. It's time now for our segment Public Pulse, where you text us with your opinion. The question is, what's your take on the efforts underway to slash the grant being given on chemical fertilizers? Your options are A, farmers' agony, B, result of financial crisis, and C, promoting organic fertilizers. The voting is on. Type NEWS, select your option A, B or C and send it to 34001 to share your opinion with us. Let's move on to the international update. The World Health Organization has urged China's health officials to regularly share specific and real-time information on the COVID-19 situation in the country as it continues to assess the latest surge in the number of infections. The agency has asked Chinese officials to share more genetic sequencing data as well as data on hospitalizations, deaths and vaccinations. Official figures from China have become an unreliable guide as less testing is being done across the country following the recent easing of the strict zero-COVID policy, the organization has said. WHO has also previously said that China may be struggling to keep a tally of COVID-19 infections. The agency has invited Chinese scientists to present detailed data on viral sequencing at its meeting of a technical advisory group scheduled for January 3rd. COVID infections have risen across China this month after Beijing dismantled its zero-COVID policies, including regular PCR testing on its population. The United States, South Korea, India, Italy, Japan and Taiwan have all imposed COVID tests for travelers from China in response. The US has also attributed the recent change in its policy to the lack of information on COVID variants and concerns that the increased cases in China could result in the development of new variants of the virus. Barbara Walters, one of the most visible women on US television as the first female anchor on an evening news broadcast and one of TV's most prominent interviewers, has died at the age of 93. Walters, who created the popular ABC women's talk show The View in 1997, passed away yesterday at her home in New York. In a broadcast career spanning 5 decades, Walters interviewed an array of world leaders, including Cuba's Fidel Castro, Muammar Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein of Iraq, and every U.S. president and first lady since Richard and Pat Nixon. Walters, who began her journalism career on NBC's The Today Show in 1960s as a writer and segment producer, earned 12 Emmy Awards, 11 of those while at ABC News, according to the network. The 193-member United Nations General Assembly has asked the International Court of Justice, ICJ, to give an opinion on the legal consequences of Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem, areas the Palestinians want for a state in a 1967 war. It withdrew from Gaza in 2005, but along with neighboring Egypt, controls the enclave's borders. The Hague-based ICJ, also known as the World Court, is the top UN court dealing with disputes between states. Its rulings are binding, though the ICJ has no power to enforce them. The request for a court opinion on Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories was made in a resolution adopted by the UN General Assembly with 87 votes in favor. 26 countries voted against, among them Israel, the US, Germany, Canada, Italy, Australia and the UK, while 53 countries abstained. Israel's former Prime Minister Yair Lapid, who was replaced on Thursday by Benjamin Netanyahu, last month urged world leaders to oppose the move, saying that bringing the matter to the court would only play into the hands of extremists. The ICJ last weighed in on the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in 2004 when it ruled that an Israeli separation barrier was illegal. Israel rejected this, accusing the court of being politically motivated. Now, in our Public Voice segment, we've asked football fans in several provinces how they remember the legendary football player Pele. Let's take a look at what they had to say.
फुटबलको एउटा लेजेन्डरी एउटा युग बितेको जस्तो एउटा युगको समाप्ति भएको जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ।
पहिले जस्तो खेल्ने प्लेयर पाउला तर पहिले जस्तो प्लेयर चाहिँ पाउन धेरै नै गाह्रो पर्छ।
ब्राजिलकै एउटा सबभन्दा महान एउटा प्लेयर भनेर चिनेको थिए।
आदर्शका पिताको रूपमा लिइन्छ।
किन उहाँको नाम बिना फुटबल अधुरो रहन्छ।
उहाँबाट अन्य खेलाडीहरूले धेरै सिक्नु जरुरी छ।
उहाँ अहिले इतिहास छोडेर जानुभएको छ।
बल जस्तो घुमाउने तरिका, पहिचान्ने खेल्ने तरिका,
पेले जस्तो खेलाडी अहिलेसम्म निस्किएको छैन।
That is all for the moment. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.